Welcome to the Niche Pursuits podcast. Today we are joined by Lily Ray, who is a Google algorithm update specialist. That's not her official title. She's a director of SEO at a big SEO agency, but really she is an expert in Google updates. You might have followed along with her on Twitter or LinkedIn and read about her analysis of updates. And she has some fantastic insights into Google Updates. We drill her on everything that goes in to what we see in updates. Obviously, we just had the helpful content update. So we definitely spend some time talking about what that update is and what it impacts and the effects that we've seen so far. But most of the conversation is a little bit more broad in nature. Sorry for the term there. But we talk really about updates in general. And this topic, and I ask her about it actually, is so interesting for the type of marketers that we are, the content creators, the people who are making affiliate websites and content websites, because there's so many different updates now that go into what we do. That we have this helpful content update, we have broad core updates that happen several times a year, and then we have product review updates that happen many, many times per year. And so understanding Google updates, understanding where the algorithm is, where it's going, and then what are the factors that are impacting rankings as they make updates. This is so important for us as content creators, website owners, as businesses. So Lily does such a great job at answering a lot of the questions as they relate to things like links, content, deleting pages, indexation, how to analyze your content when it dropped. Why do big sites with bad user experiences outrank smaller sites? Everything and everything in between. So I really hope you enjoy this and that it's a timely interview for you. I've said it before, chances are that no matter when you listen to this, there's either an update that's just happened, one that's happening right now, or one that's about to come. And it's a good time to lean into what Google is doing in these updates. I hope you enjoy. Welcome back to the Niche Pursuits podcast. My name is Jared Bauman. Today we are joined by Lily Ray. Lily, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have you here. I'm excited for today's episode. It's an honor to have you on. We are talking about updates from Google. I know that that's a bit of a specialty of yours, and certainly we just got done with a helpful content update, as it were. Before we kind of get into the meat and potatoes here, why don't I turn it over to you and give us some backstory and tell us a little bit more about who you are.
Sure, sounds great. So my name's Lily Ray, and I've been doing SEO for, I think, over 12 years now. I currently serve as the Senior SEO Director and Head of Organic Research at an agency called Amsive Digital. So I kind of help oversee the SEO team and also double as like our SEO researcher, so to speak. So I do a lot of research about what Google's up to, big algorithm updates and kind of like new trends and developments in the SEO space. So, yeah.
I know from following along with what you're doing, you're certainly one of the kind of go-to experts when it comes to these updates, and they come thicker and faster, it feels like, in the last couple of years. Let's kick off today by talking about the helpful content update. I think we can start there. And, at time of recording, this had basically just come to a conclusion, but no matter when you are listening to the episode here, it's going to have a bearing on what you're doing. Maybe, again, most users are going to be pretty familiar with Google updates, but let's set the stage for what the Google helpful content update was.
Yes, so the helpful content update was kind of a new type of update in the sense that it set out a new criteria for what Google's looking for in terms of content quality. It's definitely consistent with what Google's laid out with, previous core updates and the product review updates, and even dating back to like Panda when Google laid out a lot of quality guidelines for what they're looking for. But this is a new update in the sense that it created a new classifier, which is the word that Google's using, that can basically determine if a site as a whole is producing unhelpful content. And if Google determines that the site is largely producing unhelpful content, then the whole entire site can be affected by this classifier in a negative way. So you can actually see the rankings of all of your content potentially go down if the site meets that criteria. So it's been rolling out over the last couple of weeks, as you mentioned. They just finished the initial rollout, but from what we understand, they might continue to use this classifier, and it can be used in different ways with future Google updates.
So one of the things I read about, and that has been a bit of a news story about the helpful content update, is, from what I understand, this is ongoing, or it's embedded now into the algorithm. Whereas core updates that we know about, that Google announces as well, that happen a couple of times a year, core updates are kind of singular events that reset the algorithms. But the helpful content update seems that it's going to be embedded permanently or constantly tweaked in the algorithm. Is that the right way to think about it?
Yeah, I believe so. It's something that continues to run over time. And they said they're using machine learning, which I believe indicates that what we're seeing with this initial rollout can change and evolve over time as the algorithms become smarter at identifying unhelpful content. So what I think is interesting is the update started out a little bit less impactful than I think a lot of us were anticipating, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we won't see bigger impacts in the future. But what makes it tricky is we don't exactly know if a site declines in the future, if it's specifically because of this new classifier.
Classic. Of course, it's getting harder and harder to understand the mechanisms. You mentioned it. So, obviously there was a big buzz about this update. It started off pretty slow. It sounds like maybe, though, as we reach the tail end, did you start to see much more of an impact with the sites? And maybe tell us a little bit about what you were seeing towards the tail end, when the impact might have gone up.
Yeah, definitely. I think the update lasted about 2 weeks, as Google said it would. And in the beginning, it was kind of bizarre because there definitely wasn't movement. Like I had a variety of different clients and sites that I was keeping an eye on because I was expecting to see that they were impacted. In fact, they still haven't been impacted. So I was a little bit surprised by that, because these are sites that we're working with and helping to make the content more helpful, but they do have a history of what I kind of believe is unhelpful content. So I didn't see those sites get impacted. And then I looked at all the other traditional places that I look when I'm doing this research, didn't really see anybody get impacted. And it wasn't until, I want to say, September 1st, so that was about halfway through the rollout, that there were definitely some sites that started to fit the pattern of what we usually see with core updates or big Google updates. So as of a couple of days ago, when the update rolled out or finished rolling out, there's definitely a variety of different sites that clearly saw the impact around that time frame.
Google gave a lot of documentation about what to look at when you're evaluating if a site would be considered helpful or not. There was a lot of questions you can ask yourself, actually, which, sometimes in the past you would look maybe to the quality rater guidelines for guidance on what a good site is. And now we kind of have this set of questions you ask yourself. Did you see the impacts following those questions? And maybe dive a little bit more into what I'm getting at is what is helpful in brass tacks in reality, according to this update, versus maybe some of the things that we read about or see about. And I will include a link in the show notes, by the way, to those questions that Google published, so people can kind of look at them maybe while they're listening to your answer.
Yeah. What was interesting about Google's questions is that it's kind of subjective, right? So a lot of them are like,
I felt the same way.
Yeah, like a lot of it's like, are you primarily focused on writing content for search engines when you write the content that you write? And it's kind of like, well, a lot of us are, like even the best sites on the internet, like you could argue that the New York Times also writes content for search engines, but it doesn't mean that it's unhelpful, right? So it's like, there's kind of this spectrum of like, we didn't really know what types of sites were going to get hit by this. And so a lot of it's, focused on, is the site primarily focused on like SEO tactics, but not actually answering the question? Or maybe it's using like clickbaity headlines that don't provide a lot of value in the content. Or maybe the site is too general in nature. It talks about too many different topics, but it's not truly an expert in one specific area. Or like sites that, are using like too much automation or too much AI or whatever. Google didn't actually use the word AI, but I think a lot of the SEO community interpreted it that way. But it's a lot of, again, it's a lot of what they've been saying over the years. They want content that's focused on real expertise, real authenticity, content that doesn't say the same thing as every other site on the internet. And, in terms of who was affected, I was actually surprised by how few sites were affected, because I was expecting this to hit a lot more sites than it did. Because if you read those guidelines and you're kind of like taking it like pretty literally, it's like there's a lot of content on the internet that I thought should have been affected by this. So it's great that maybe, more webmasters didn't lose their business overnight, but it's we'll see what happens in the future as if the classifier gets stronger.
I don't want to over generalize, but a lot of what helpful content update seemed documentation wise, it just kind of seemed like a rewrite of the best practices that in many ways either Google or algorithms have shown us in the past couple of years. And I think that that's a bit confusing to understand, because now as maybe like you said, a webmaster or an SEO, you have, and certainly for like this audience, a lot of people are affiliate focused or just publishing content with the intent of making money from ad revenue. So you have these two things, but definitely a lot of affiliates. So you have the general core updates that happen several times a year now. You have helpful content update subsequently rolled into the algorithm. And then you also have these product review updates that come seemingly 4 or 6 times a year. Like, how does someone approach that maybe as an affiliate marketer? How do you approach getting your mind around all that's going on and trying to understand it from a root level of how you're working?
Yeah, I think the bad news is that if you want to take shortcuts and you want to look for a quick fix or some solution that's like, oh, I did no work and just set up this whole automated process and made thousands of dollars, like it's just probably not going to work like that much longer. Like, people have gotten away with a lot of that type of stuff over the years, and I think this update is the latest iteration of Google saying, like, we're getting smarter at identifying when people are doing these, like, again, like shortcuts to try to cheat the algorithms without providing real value. So the bad news is it's probably going to get harder to just like throw up a site and expect it to make a lot of money really quickly. But the good news is that Google's pretty clear about what it's looking for. All these guidelines are essentially the same, like we said before. So if you do want to make a niche site or an affiliate site or whatever, it's still possible to do that, but there's very specific criteria about what they're looking for. So something that I've been really focused on this year in the past couple of years is Google's notion of EAT, expertise, authority, and trust. And they've been talking a lot about EAT. And I think that one common factor among all of these updates is that Google's use of the word expertise. If you read any of Google's documentation over the last few years, including the helpful content update, they talk a lot about expertise. So if you want to make a site and you want a site that makes money, you just have to convey that you're actually an expert. So it's hard to like fake that. You have to actually do the work, actually do the testing, and actually demonstrate to Google that you are a true expert in your field. But if you're doing that, you can probably succeed.
Oh, that's a perfect transition, because I didn't want to spend the whole time talking about the helpful content update. I wanted to talk about, get your insights on some of these, how to make your website, how to make your brand somewhat bulletproof to updates, whether it's the core update or the helpful content update. And you kind of led into it as affiliate marketers, certainly, or even just content creators in general. It feels like the EAT effects are heavier and stronger in, we'll call it YMYL niches, which is niches that pertain to your money, your life, so health and finance and these types of areas. And then you have a lot of affiliate marketers that are making websites about things that, we'll say, we'll leave out the people that are making websites about things they aren't experts in. But let's say that there's a hobbyist who's an expert. Let's say that there's a gardener who's an expert. These are things that are a lot harder to, I'll say, prove that you're an expert in, right? I'm using air quotes for those listening on the podcast. How does somebody who's not in a YMYL space, where you have a doctorate degree or you have an MD or something like that, how do you kind of validate your expertise?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I think is interesting, and this is just a theory of mine based on my research, but I know a lot of us that are looking very closely at this type of thing are seeing the same things, which is that it's not just about putting, I'm an expert with this many years in the field, or I have this and this degree. Like, of course you should do that, especially if it's your money, your life content. But if it's about gardening, or if it's about Pokemon cards, or whatever it is that you're writing about, I believe Google is algorithmically able to understand people that are writing about this stuff because they actually know the information, as opposed to people who are just researching what everybody else has already said and saying the exact same thing. I do think a lot of the sites that are getting hit by this helpful content update are just saying the same thing that everybody else did, or like automating what everybody else already said. The people that are succeeding in many cases are actual experts that I actually just did a variety of presentations about this, but there's a lot of different sites where the gardener or the small business owner or whatever is involved in the content production process, and they're writing from the first person and they're writing without referencing anybody else. They're just explaining what they see in their work. And a lot of people are linking to them because they're the original source of information. So as much as you can provide, like, of course you don't want to provide medical advice that's not based in evidence because you're a doctor, but like if you're a gardener and there's something that you notice all the time when you're gardening, like put that information, put your perspective, your opinion in the article, because Google's specifically looking for information that they haven't found on other sites.
How important is some of the, maybe we'll call it intangible factors in establishing this? Do you see any connection to maybe a content creator also having a video side, a video component, a YouTube account to help establish their expertise, or custom imagery or unique data generation? You talked about links. Well, talked about in the affiliate community is one great way to generate links, to try to figure out a way to put together a set of data that people will link to that's unique and that's new. Like, how important are some of these intangibles? I don't even know if that's the right word, but I'm just calling it that. Things outside of just creating the content. How important are they in terms of what you're seeing with rankings and in terms of what you're seeing with expertise?
That's a really great question. I think it's hard to quantify, to your point, but like what's interesting is the more that you build a persona for the expert. I mean, Google owns a lot of different products, right? Google owns YouTube. Google has the knowledge graph. Google has Google Scholar, Google Discover, Google News, so many other ones, right? So it's like, and you can see different tests that they're doing. So for example, in Google Discover, they're starting to test showing the author name alongside the article name. And that's like, okay, clearly they're capable of understanding who certain authors are. And they probably, because they're Google, they can make the connection between that author and that author's knowledge panel, or maybe that author being mentioned in YouTube or Google Scholar. Like myself, for example, I've spent a lot of time working on this. So if you Google my name, you're going to see a knowledge graph result, my own personal website, all the different social profiles that Google understands about me, YouTube information, like Google Scholar information, like it knows that I'm an entity. And I've seen with some of these experts that I've been researching is that the same content that they write, if they have a video version on YouTube and an article version on Google search, both will rank. And it's like the same expert listed twice. So it's like whether or not Google can perfectly understand that that's the same person, which I think they can, it's still two opportunities to rank in organic search.
Right.
So
and we're seeing a lot of those other factors ranking. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, be in all the places for sure.
Yep. Okay. Well, for all those affiliate marketers listening who don't want to get in front of a camera, bad news for you. But if you're an affiliate marketer who doesn't mind embracing maybe a second medium to deliver your content, that's, I suppose, encouraging.
Yeah, it's true.
Let's talk about another common affiliate marketer challenge, which is that most don't have storefronts. And without a storefront or without a place of business per se, it's tough to put trustworthy type information on your website, like an address, an embedded map, a physical location. Usually a contact on an affiliate website is often just an email address or a contact form. And that does fit for an affiliate marketer because you're not really selling a product, you're just providing information, but then it can also lead to potentially what we've heard are trust issues in Google's eyes because you're kind of perhaps a flighty brand or not someone that they can pinpoint down. Talk about maybe some, well, first off, does it have any impact? And then any insights for affiliate marketers who kind of live in that type of a world?
Yeah, that's a really great point. We certainly talk about this problem on the local SEO side of things. So like I work at an agency, we have a lot of clients that are very focused on Google Business Profile or Google Maps. That's a really big problem. If you don't have an address, it's very, very hard to rank. You can be what's called like a service area business, but it's very hard to rank compared to somebody that has like a brick and mortar location. So on that side of things, we absolutely have that problem, but I haven't really thought as much about it being a trust issue on the organic side, aside from maps, but that does make a lot of sense because the way that EAT works is that Google's looking for patterns or signals among trusted companies, right? Mm-hmm. So like if they notice that all the best companies in whatever area, whatever field are always showing their address, and then this other player comes in and they're not showing theirs, we don't exactly know what Google's looking for in terms of which signals, but that could be a red flag to them that like, why is this not a business that people can visit in person? So I don't know what the workaround for that is other than just like trying to convey as much trust and information about the business as you can in other ways.
Yeah. Yeah, in other ways too. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, these are just like reading the tea leaves type of stuff in terms of what affiliate marketers tend to chat about. I'm definitely not saying any of it's indicative or not indicative, but these are questions I hear constantly from this vantage point. Let's talk about links as they relate to algorithms and as they relate to updates. We know that, links to have a role in the way that Google views content, and it certainly has a hand in their scoring system. At the same time, building links is something that has widely been discussed over the years, and dating all the way back to Penguin updates and their approach to links. Well, certainly just one of them, but where are links nowadays in the algorithm? And then maybe I'll dovetail that into a couple follow-up questions for you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously still important for better for worse. For me, it's like the biggest pet peeve of the SEO space is the fact that links still matter so much, but that's a different conversation. I think that, it's one of these things that absolutely Google still looks at it. It's becoming harder and harder to manipulate. There's plenty of sites and companies out there that are very focused on buying links or trying to spam the algorithms with links. I think that over time, Google's getting more and more sophisticated at identifying those patterns. So like, for example, my agency, the team that I work on, we don't play in that space at all. Like we can't take those types of risks for our clients. And a lot of the times we get clients that come to us because they were kind of buying links that they thought were good links, and then they got a manual action, and it's very hard to recover unless you know how to properly recover. So it's like for the types of brands that we work on, like we can't take that risk. That being said, there's ways to build links that are compliant with Google's guidelines and good for the brand. So we try to focus on those. They're much harder initiatives. They're much more resource intensive. That takes a lot more work. So like doing a lot of research about, just gathering a lot of data and statistics about something related to your client's niche, and then doing some type of PR to try to get the word out there, and then getting a lot of links that way is for sure the most impactful way of doing this. You're going to get the best quality links, but again, that's PR. It takes a lot of work.
Yep, that's PR. Yeah, and that does generate links, but you're right, that's more PR.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's say that someone, and I'm curious about your thoughts on it, like you have bad links, maybe because you were building links that were not the best for a while. You ended up having a site where somebody previously had, or you worked with a team that you thought was building links for you in a positive way, and you determined they're not. The word in the street is that Google doesn't really worry about bad links anymore. They just ignore them. But there is still the disavow file, and there is still that process. What are your thoughts on whether you should sit down and try to tell Google about the links that they shouldn't pay attention to, i.e. submitting a disavow file, or does it not really matter that much anymore?
Yeah, there's so many different opinions on this topic. It's a huge
Sorry, I kind of threw you into hornet's nest there.
No. I'm a SEO director. I have to answer these types of questions all the time. So what I believe is that if you have a history of going against Google's link guidelines, which basically means paying for links in one form or another, and you've done that extensively, again, like the clients that come to us that are like, we've worked with these 3 different companies for the past 2 years who have built us 20 links per month, and those links are all against Google's guidelines. They're all paid links or whatever they are. That's not good, especially if that's like a really big proportion of your link profile. So in those cases, I would probably work with my team to disavow those links. I know that not every SEO believes that that's effective, but from my perspective, it's like, why not do that? Because what we don't want happening is getting a manual action. Those are very hard to recover from. That being said, I would only do it in those cases where you're actively buying links or collecting a lot of links that violate Google's guidelines. There's a whole other world of spammy links, and every site has spammy links. If you look at hrefs for pretty much any domain, you're going to see all kinds of like Blogspot and like, different stuff that it's just like the internet ecosystem of like, who knows why there's so many of these
success. It means your site is getting crawled and
yes, exactly. I wouldn't be too worried about those. We have a lot of clients that are like, oh, I'm being negatively attacked. It's like, well, I think Google's very good at ignoring those links. So it has to be a pattern where they see that you've actively taken part in building links that violate their guidelines. I would disavow those.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of, yeah. And for people who are listening, like it's alarming if you're new, but it's kind of, it just ends up being annoying when you've been doing it a while. There's just a bunch of chaff in terms of aggregator sites, in terms of image sites that are going to scrape your images and stuff. So don't worry about those. But if you have maybe a long history of and there's going to be a decent chunk of links that you've kind of really gone about the wrong way, that would be the time to look at the disavow.
Yeah.
Let me transition into some more of the technical sides of a website and their impact on the rankings. And let me just maybe set the stage by saying, hey, when we talk about the technical side, we'll be referring to all the things that show up in a site audit, maybe that you would run on Ahrefs, on Screaming Frog, all the technical components that go into making your site tick. Where does all that lay in now with an update? And again, we're talking about updates really more broadly now. Sorry to borrow the term broad, because I know that Google loves to say broad core update. But when we're talking about updates now, we're talking about whether it's helpful content, core updates, product review updates, like just in general. How concerned does someone need to be about getting all the tech details perfectly lined up versus not as big of a factor as some of the other things we've already been talking about?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the SEO tools a lot of the times make it sound like technical issues are more important than they are. I also think a lot of people who are maybe newer at SEO blow some of these technical findings out of proportion.
Mm-hmm.
Like having a certain number of 404 pages on your site is probably not a big deal. You know, if it's something that you're like linking to thousands of times internally and there's other people linking to that 404 page, like, of course, that's a problem. But it's really important to understand prioritization of technical problems. It's also important to understand how severe they are. So like if Google is unable to crawl your content because it's set up in a way that is not crawlable for, search engines because they can't like render the link or something like that, that's a huge technical problem. If you have no index tags in your most important product pages, that's a problem. You know what I mean? So it's like it's understanding the severity of the problem, but one of the issues is a lot of these SEO tools don't do that for you. You have to kind of understand the fundamentals. So generally speaking, I think it's very much case by case, but as far as the updates and everything go, if there's a lot of trouble that Google has crawling the site, indexing the site properly, maybe like it's blowing through its crawl budget really quickly because the way you set up the site, it's like really important pages are not easily accessible via internal links or something like that. That can affect your site during a core update for sure. I believe that Google's had this notion of like site-wide quality issues long before the helpful content update. So if there's a pattern of Google like struggling to crawl and index your content, that can work against you during these big updates.
Let's talk about site-wide stuff versus page by page as it relates to algorithms. I'm glad you brought it up. I have it on my notes, but it's a little bit more buried down. So let's dive into it. The helpful content update is kind of supposed to be one of the first updates in a while that I can remember that is site-wide versus, technically speaking, the algorithm looks at your website on a page-by-page basis. Am I saying that correctly? And maybe unpack that a little bit more so people can kind of understand why that's important.
That is another big controversial question in the SEO space.
I'm not intending to throw you into all these. I really am not.
No, it's fine. I'm pretty confident in my own belief system with SEO these days. My opinion is there has absolutely been this notion of site-wide quality issues, domain-wide quality issues for a very long time. If you look at performance during core updates over the last few years, for sure, there's many different examples where a site is either negatively or positively impacted across the whole site. And yes, of course, certain pages will be hit harder than others, but you can see this whole site has been devalued algorithmically because of the core update. And this was very true during like the Panda update, during the Medic update in 2018, where there's a pattern of this site producing not great medical content, for example. So the whole site's gone. Like if you look at the visibility of the site, it's like gone overnight.
Yeah.
But of course, it's important to triage and to see which queries were impacted more than others. Did the landscape change for a certain type of intent? So like one thing that I see a lot during core updates is like Google used to show this certain type of page for this query, but now it's decided that it wants to show like dictionary pages or something that's a completely different intent. So you want to look for that. But again, it's controversial, but I definitely think that Google's been looking across the domain for a long time.
You have 100 times, 1,000 times more visibility than I do, but that's been my belief too.
Awesome.
How do you deal with a change of intent? Let's say, for example, because this happened for me at one point where I lost a lot of featured snippets in an update. And I'm going to leave aside, like, I know there was a whole featured snippet debate. Let's not touch that one with this question, but I lost a lot of featured snippets. But it turns out that I didn't lose them to a competitor. I didn't drop from number one out of the featured snippet spot to somebody else. The featured snippet just went away. And that's something that can happen where Google will change what type of display or what type of results they're displaying in the search. There's also the time where you drop from number one out of the SERPs for the ranking. And it's because instead of ranking a product page, Google now wants to rank an informational page. Like, these are different types of situations where you didn't really lose your number one spot to a competitor. You didn't drop from 1 to 5 in an update and somebody else went to number one, but you kind of lost your ranking and thus your visibility and your traffic because of the way Google changed the intent. Do you just kind of move on and pack your bags and say, well, it was nice while I had it? Or are there things you kind of should do to try to regain those spots?
Yeah, it's a great question. It depends on the nature of your site. So for sites that make money off ad revenue and page views, essentially, you probably want to find a way to continue to rank. So if it's like publishing new types of content to meet Google's intent a little bit better, you might want to look at that, assuming that it's on brand and assuming that you can create high quality content and everything like that. But for a lot of the sites that we work with, when this happens, you have to ask yourself, are we obsessing too much over traffic that doesn't matter for us? Or did this have any impact on conversions? Because just because we lost a handful of like ingredient definition pages, like, were those pages ever converting in the first place? Or was it just like a brand play where it's like, hopefully people are seeing us out there. We have a lot of ingredient definitions, but like no one's ever converting from those pages. So like it's a knee-jerk reaction for a lot of sites that lose visibility during a core update to say like, oh, Google doesn't like our content. It's like, yeah, but the conversions are the same. So your business is fine, like the business is like unaffected. So it's really just about like the quality or the kind of like the business impact of losing visibility during a core update.
It's a great point that everyone should hear. Like, make sure you understand what your KPIs are, even as they relate to SEO, and don't get too caught up in some of the stuff that hurts as someone who practices SEO, but doesn't really hurt the business at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me go back to what we were talking about, which is kind of page level versus site wide, and less opinion, more just in practice. Like, what are your tips when an update rolls out and you're impacted one way or the other? We'll say negatively, because that's certainly where people really want to roll up their sleeves and dive in more. Like, you have this impact, this core update or a helpful content or a product review update. You have an update that has hit your site. You've dropped, call it 25%. I'm just making a number up. You got a lot of pages. You got a lot of data between Search Console, analytics, maybe an Ahrefs or a SEMrush or one of these platforms. Like, where would you start? Where would you recommend someone to kind of start drilling in so you're not overwhelmed, but you can get some practical tips on where to go from there?
Yeah, I think it's really important to look at patterns because, again, I'm of the camp that I think that these things tend to be site-wide. And more often than not, when I'm analyzing a site that has been negatively impacted or my team is looking at one, there's some type of quality pattern that can be found across many different pages. So you have to be able to analyze data at scale. So that generally involves doing a full crawl of the website, collecting all the pages, collecting all the performance of the pages, and using something like the Search Console API, so you can get like a bigger view of all the affected pages and not be like cut off by Search Console's limits of exporting within the interface. You want to get everything, right? You want to look at all the things at scale. And I love this stuff because you can often see like here's a good example. Many of the sites that I see that are impacted by core updates have a lot of low quality pages. So they might be something like doorway pages where they try to have a page for each specific city or neighborhood or county or whatever in the country, and they don't actually have locations in all those places. Like, that to me is an obvious pattern that I've seen time and time again for sites that get impacted. And you might say like, oh, but it's true, we help people in those neighborhoods. And Google's like, this is literally the definition of doorway pages. If you read Google's guidelines, they say to not do that, and you're doing that. And maybe you got away with it for a long time, but we're seeing your site is trying to take these shortcuts. So it's really about, again, collecting all the data and then looking to see if there's something that you've been doing that falls into the gray area of what Google says not to do.
It's really hard to analyze your own content and evaluate if it's helpful, especially for people whose sites have dropped and they're the ones who wrote the content.
Yep,
Like,
exactly.
businesses at large, maybe you're talking to a CEO or a CMO and they're like, well, who wrote this content and why? Okay, we got to change that's a bit different when you're the one who wrote the content. You've written 100, 150, 200 articles, you're doing well, and then your content, or then you get hit in an update and drop 25%. Do you have any strategies or tips for someone to get out of their own head and try to evaluate content that they've written and that they actually believe is helpful? Like, let's assume that they don't think that they've taken shortcuts and they still lost in an update pretty big.
Yeah, this is where it starts to get complicated and time consuming and resource intensive, but you have to do some version of user testing. You have to think about, even if it's just like bringing in a external company, whether it's an SEO company or maybe a content company or something, to like take a look at the content and see if they actually consider it helpful. It's really important to get another person's perspective, because like you said, if you believe it's helpful but you're the only person looking at it, that's very subjective. So I think, and then there's things you can do too, like, UX, like conversion rate optimization, like testing on the page. So even collecting user feedback, like you can have surveys at the end of the content. You can say, did you find this content helpful? Or just any type of like feedback from the user is another option. But there's a really great article by Glenn Gabe, a good friend of mine in the SEO space, all about user testing and the importance of getting like third-party reviews of your content. So I would check out that article.
Let's see I'll see if I can get that from you and include that in the show notes as well.
Sure.
Yeah, that's always tough. So that's hard to really evaluate content that you've written unless you can get some other metrics. So those are some great thoughts. Let's talk about this concept of deleting content. I will say that if you again were a part of the craze of people that leaned in to Google pre-announcing the helpful content update, certainly you might have known someone who went about deleting a bunch of content off of a site of theirs that was deemed low quality by them. And if not, you read about it. Like, a lot of people, when they heard that the helpful content update was coming out, went about deleting a lot of content that was low quality. Now, I'll save that, because what I want to do is use it as an analogy, or as maybe a launching pad for us to talk about that. If you look at your site and you think that some of the content isn't very helpful, what's the best approach? Approach one, just knock it off, delete it. But then perhaps you're deleting content that helped round out your authority on the topic. Or do you try to update it and make every page in your site more helpful? Like, when you are evaluating content and you're looking at deleting, what do you think the algorithms kind of have to say about that from a broad picture? And what should site owners look at?
Great question. And this was all kind of like exhilarating for me, because our team and I have been focused on removing content as one of our main SEO strategies for many of our clients for a long time. So it was kind of like, when the helpful content update was announced and everybody started deleting their content, it's like, finally, like, people aren't taking this seriously. Because we've helped a lot of sites recover from core updates. And a lot of the time what we were doing is eliminating unhelpful content. And there's a variety of different ways to do it. And it's also, to your point, important to not just do it haphazardly where you're deleting a bunch of stuff that might be helping you. So I think the important thing is to collect a lot of metrics about these different pages. Obviously, the most important one is going to be how much organic traffic they're getting over time. So if something is dead in the water and it's just not ranking for anything for a long time, for like 16 months or whatever window you're looking at, that's probably a good candidate for getting rid of that content. To your point, if there's some other use for it, like maybe it's a privacy policy or something, like you should probably keep it there.
Yeah, good one.
Yeah, but like, collect metrics about how it's doing on Google. I would say there's other things you should look at too. So like, if something's not indexed, that's the first place to go. If Google's crawling it but not indexing it, that could be a sign of a quality issue. So maybe those should go first, because that's just time that Google's wasting not indexing your content. So maybe start there. But also, yeah, like if you touch on any topics that are very controversial or like fringe content, like I've had a client where I noticed that they had a lot of like 9/11 conspiracy content that was like, and it's not getting traffic. To me, that's a good sign that like Google very specifically in the quality guidelines says they don't want that type of content on sites. So start there. If there's anything that's a red flag for Google, you should also eliminate that content.
It sounds like you've seen a lot of success though with deleting content. So maybe could you give us a little, like, what can site owners expect when they delete content? And again, I'm going to take it back to, it's one thing to say buy or inherit a website or come into a website and your role on the website is to evaluate content and you say that stuff needs to be deleted. But it's a whole other topic when someone has slaved over that content and it's not going anywhere. It hasn't gotten indexed. It's not ranking. And they're like, I wrote that. I think it's important. I thought it was good. Like, what can come from really doing a prune of your content on your site so that you're just serving, kind of serving the best pages, or at least the pages that Google likes?
Yeah, I would just be really careful about how you execute this strategy. So don't do anything haphazardly. Again, like, don't just delete a bunch of stuff. What my team and I work on that's been really effective is like sites that have, so a lot of these sites have been producing content for a really long time where they talk about the same thing over and over. Like, maybe they don't have a good process in place for seeing that they wrote basically the same article 6 different times. And maybe it was 6 different authors that like wrote the same thing. And now the site's just having thousands of pages that are effectively the same thing, and they're kind of competing for the same keywords, or maybe like both pages are ranking on page 3 because they kind of say the same thing, but they're like, neither one of them can rank on page 1. So collecting all those metrics and then saying, you know what, we kind of said the same thing on both of these pages. This page is performing a little bit better. This page has the better content, but this other page has some content that we didn't talk about on the first page. So let's move that content to this other page, implement a redirect, and then only have one. So that's hard work, right? Like, that takes a lot of subjective, like, I'm going to dig through this content and see what's helpful and what's not. But by doing that over the course of time, you're getting rid of the number of pages that Google has to crawl through and theoretically creating more helpful pages, maybe longer pages. So again, it's a very time-consuming process, but we've absolutely seen that work very well for our clients.
I have 2 more questions that I want to hit you with before we kind of bring it back.
Sure.
Cannibalization, keyword cannibalization, writing content where there's some overlap. Maybe you have 2 pages on your site that are competing or ranking for the same keyword. Again, you'll really get different opinions here. You'll get people who are very big on making sure that each page is only targeting one keyword. And if you have cannibalization issues, to definitely deal with them through internal linking, through redirecting, all this stuff. And you also have a camp that talks about it not being a big deal, and it's just something that is inherent as your site grows. What are you seeing in terms of updates? I'm sure that that you have an opinion on it one way or the other, given some of the things you've already said so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, if you asked me a year or 2 ago, I would say it's definitely a problem. It's something you should look at. And generally speaking, we see really great impacts when we consolidate, cannibalizing content onto one page. However, Google created this like indented search result thing in the last year or so, where it's a lot of the times you'll see page A and then page B right under it when they're like basically the exact same thing. They don't always indent your content, so I wouldn't rely on that as your SEO strategy. But if you are in a situation where Google's showing 2 pages or 3 pages for one keyword, don't change anything, because that's like, you're getting more results that way. But I wouldn't set out my SEO strategy trying to do that. I see that sites that get indented more often than not are like very authoritative sites, or maybe they're sites that are a very, very close match for the query. So like, if you type like a medical symptom, you might see that the Mayo Clinic gets 3 different indented results, but like not every site is going to get that. So I still like maintain the same philosophy that you should probably have one great page per keyword or topic that you're targeting. But again, if you're seeing the indented results, probably just keep it that way. But also like, try to make sure that the intent is different as much as possible from page to page. So maybe you have 2 pages that talk about the same thing, but they serve 2 different intents.
Right. Yeah. 2 different types of, even types of it, a query base, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So just I hear this all the time. So I want to throw the question towards you. And, I think basically this question probably kind of answers itself based on the last 45 minutes we've spent, but it's a question. So let me kind of ask it to you and get your opinion. And it's pretty constant for people in this space, affiliate marketers or content creators that are up against big competitors. And when I say big, I mean like really maybe well-known sites that have a stronger brand name. And you go to their site and their site, the big site, is slow as molasses in terms of speed, really poor user experience, ads, and stuff going on all over the place, and yet update after update, they don't get negatively impacted. And like, how does that happen, and why does that happen? Why do we see so many sites have such poor user experiences but still continue to grow in the visibility and in the rankings?
Yeah. This gets down to the importance of some ranking factors over other ones, and it's also query dependent as well. So if you type, again, heart attack, and WebMD is the first example that comes to mind. I think a lot of people have concerns about how many ads they have or whatever. And it's like, well, they have so many ads. Why can I not have that many ads? Guess what? WebMD has been collecting SEO history and value and authoritativeness and everything like that, and links for years and years and years and years, right? Like they've been doing this. They have a big brand name. They're very well known. They have all these really important signals that are hard to fake that have made them an authority in the health space. So can they have ads? Can they have these things that get other sites in trouble sometimes? Yeah, because that's not the most important ranking factor that Google's looking at when somebody's Googling a severe medical symptom. So it depends on the query itself. It depends on the competitive landscape. But yes, if you have a big brand that's earned a lot of SEO credibility over the years, you can probably get away with a little bit more of that type of stuff. But and other things like the page experience signal is a lightweight signal compared to EAT. Like if you're an authority in finance, again, you can probably have a not great page experience because Google knows the content is that much more trustworthy. So it depends on what the competitive landscape looks like, who you're up against, and you can't compare yourself to these giant authorities in the space if you're like a small blogger. I would focus as much on content quality as possible for smaller niche sites that are starting out, because the best way that you can compete with these big players is by providing a unique perspective that they might not have on their sites.
It's great. It's great. I want to close by asking you a really broad question, a really big question. And, every day you kind of see this or hear this, or you feel it yourself, right? one of the three. But the landscape of updates and the landscape of the algorithm is changing. I don't know. It feels faster than ever. Certainly, there were these really big updates 10 years ago or so with Penguin and Panda. I always tend to blend the two of them into one Pengua update. But no, like we had these big updates. And then ever since, 2017, 2018, 2019, these updates have started to roll out more frequently. And it's not uncommon for a site to go up, to go down, to go up a couple updates in a row, and then to go down a couple updates in a row. Like it can be really disheartening. It can be emotionally draining, and it can feel at different times when you're on the wrong side of an update that, is this really all worth it? Is it too risky to build websites, to try to make this a part of your business plan? What are your thoughts on that? And how do you recommend, again, kind of as we wrap all this up, someone approaches the ever-changing landscape of updates from a really, really high level, and even as much mentally as it is in practice?
Yeah, it's tough, especially when you haven't started things the right way. If you've created a pattern of trying to cheat the algorithm or trying to exploit, Google's ability to understand good content or whatever it is, buying links, all these things, it's very hard to recover. And you might see during updates that you go up and down. So if you start the right way, like again, if you focus on expertise, that's my big tagline this year, you should be in good hands. Like I have an example of a site that I worked on 7 or 8 years ago. It's a small business where we created expert content with the business owner 7 years ago and haven't literally done nothing since then. Nothing. The site's exactly the same. It's still live, but like no changes have been made. No new content has been published. And those pages continue to rank in the featured snippets because they're still expert content. That business owner is not negatively impacted by core updates. It just goes up and up. So, do things right from the start, and you should be in good hands. If you're trying to like listen to too many people's SEO advice and get carried away with things that you think are going to like make you a quick buck, and like you're not thinking about the long term, yeah, it's going to be challenging because Google's getting smarter and smarter. So I would just say like read Google's quality guidelines very carefully and try to make sure you're abiding by all of them, and you should be okay.
Well, Lily, this was absolutely wonderful. I mean, we use the helpful content update as an excuse to get on a call here and do an interview, but really it was just a deep dive in all the, well, not all, but so many of the facets that kind of go into these updates, and not only how somebody can future-proof, but also how somebody can actively look at these updates and apply changes to them. So, man, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all
Of
your knowledge.
course. Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Where can people follow along with what you're doing? Where would you direct them if they want to continue to follow along with your work?
Yeah, Twitter's the best place. So I'm Lily Ray NYC. That's where I share thoughts pretty much every day. And then on LinkedIn as well, I tend to be a little bit more comprehensive with the things that I share. So that's a good place as well.
All right. Well, Lily, thanks so much for coming on board. Really appreciate it, and all the best.
You too. Thanks so much.